Good evening. It is 6:30. Members of council are assembled when you're ready to begin.
Thank you, Don. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order this council meeting of the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores for January 13th, 2025. Welcome all members and everyone in the room and everyone watching us via the live stream. The second item on the agenda is the land acknowledgement, and we'll turn that over to the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional lands and treaty territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which consists of the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash Unceded First Nation. We understand this land holds immense significance to the people of Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. We appreciate those who live and work alongside us today and who continue the traditions of their ancestors as stewards of the land we are privileged to inhabit. We thank them for the contributions they have made in both caring for the land and in shaping this community. We commit to truth and reconciliation, to acknowledging the truth about what happened to Indigenous peoples because of colonization, and to reconciliation, which begins with each and every one of us. As a local government and public organization, we are dedicated to learning about Indigenous culture, to fostering a better relationship with First Nations and their people, and we commit ourselves to actions that move us forward on a path to healing along with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation.
Okay, thank you very much. Third item on the agenda is disclosures of pecuniary interest. Anyone have one of those I'd like to declare at this time? Seeing none, of course, you can do that anytime if you need to. And then that takes us on to our public meeting. And so next on the agenda is a public meeting for file number or for zoning bylaw amendment Z 2024-066 Macintosh. And this is a public meeting under the Planning Act. The meeting on this file is now open. Purpose of the public meeting is to learn about the application and to hear from members of the public. First, we will receive a report from planning staff. Then we will hear from the applicant or their agents. Then we will hear from any members of the public. Members of the public are advised that the ability to appeal the decision on this application may be limited if you have not provided comments on the application before the decision is made. Comments may be made verbally before the committee or submitted to staff in writing before the bylaw is passed. After we've heard from the public, the committee will discuss and consider a recommendation on this application. So now I'll ask the planner, Jake Boastfield-Bastato, to present the file on the application. Jake, the floor is yours whenever you're ready.
All right, good evening, members of council. The file before you tonight is a zoning bylaw amendment to create site-specific provisions that would facilitate a severance, which will be considered by the county at a later date. So there's two aspects to the zoning bylaw amendment proposed. The first would be a reduction in minimum lot size necessary to enable the severance. And second request is a reduced side yard setback to enable construction of a dwelling on the severed lot in the future. I'll focus first on the reduced lot size. So the property is within Special Policy Area 2 in the Town of Saugeen Shores official plan. This is an area intended to maintain this portion of Southampton as low density, low rise neighborhood adjacent to the waterfront. The zoning bylaw amendment, the zoning bylaw for this zone requires a minimum lot area of 450 square meters. 411 is what is requested for the new severed parcel. The subject property itself is over just over 1,000 square meters, so it is large enough to create two lots and maintain the density suggested by the zoning bylaw through that 450 square meters. However, given the placement of the existing structure, the lot can't be divided evenly without partial demolition of the existing structure. So this leads to that requested size of 411 square meters. Given these circumstances, the proposal generally maintains the density and character intended in that special policy area based on lot sizes. So secondly, the applicant has requested a exterior side yard setback reduced from 4.5 meters to 3.5 meters. So that would be along Beach Road, as Huron Street would be the frontage of the new lot. So the intent of exterior side yard setbacks being larger than interior side yard setbacks is in part to manage streetscape impacts along exterior sides on corner lots and to maintain open amenity space. So when considering that streetscape, further west along Beach Road is first one undeveloped municipally owned lot, followed by the Southampton Tourist Park, where there are several semi-permanent mobile homes which are at or even exceeding the frontage there. As such, there isn't a consistent streetscape that would be contravened by this requested reduced exterior side yard. On top of that, a new dwelling can be built within the proposed building envelope, and it would still be below the maximum lot coverage. So the open amenity space on the area, or sorry, on the lot is generally maintained. With these considerations in mind, staff recommend approval of the requested zoning bylaw amendment. I'm happy to answer any questions following discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Jake. So we'll now hear from members of the public, and up first, we'll hear from the applicant or their agent. My understanding is the agent for the applicant is online, so we will endeavor to bring the agent in. There he is. So Mr. Davidson, introduce yourself, and the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening. My name is Ron Davidson. I'm a planning consultant, and I filed the application on behalf of the landowner, Peter McIntosh. My apologies for not being there in person tonight. I do like face-to-face meetings, but given the weather conditions and driving conditions, I decided to stay home and participate virtually. I think Mr. McIntosh is also at home watching tonight. This will be very, very brief what I have to say, just add a little bit to what Jake had to say. The zoning bylaw amendment is intended to facilitate a severance. We can call this infilling. That's probably the best way to describe this. And that type of lot creation is strongly supported by the town's official plan and by the county OP as well, and the provincial policy statement. It's just an efficient use of municipally serviced lands, which again is supported strongly and endorsed in the planning worlds, if you will. Yeah, we do need to reduce the lot area by a little bit. It's not much. It's 38.25 square meters. Just to put that in perspective, if this lot was just a little bit deeper, that is 2.83 meters more frontage on Beach Road, it would meet the lot area requirement. If we had another 2.83 meters of frontage along Beach Road, would that make the lot better? No, because we can still fit a house on the property. And it's highly doubtful that a slightly smaller lot than what's permitted would have any negative impact on the neighbors, and that's always important to take into consideration. As Jake indicated, there's also one other thing. We're asking for a relief in the exterior side yard requirement from 4.5 meters to 3.5. To be clear, we're not asking for that for the garage. So if the house includes an attached garage, so part of the house, it would have to be set back 4.5 meters, and that gives you or the owner a little bit more room to park their car in the driveway in front of the house without hanging out into the road allowance. So that's kind of an important part in my mind. It's important to note that all other provisions of the zoning bylaw will be met when a house is put on the property, including front yard, side yard, rear yard, lot coverage, and landscaped open space. Again, I don't see this impacting any of the neighbors, and Jake touched upon that in his report. One last thing, it's important to note with regard to the requested setback, that even with the reduced setback of 3.5 meters, the house will still be, by my math, about 11.5 meters from the edge of the paved road, which is considerable. Now, I realize that Beach Street could possibly be widened in the future, and although I'm not really sure why it would be, it's kind of a nice quiet street. But should that happen, the house is still going to be set back a considerable distance from the paved portion of the expanded road, even if the reduced exterior side yard is granted. And I believe there's other examples of a reduced exterior side yard in the town of 3.5 meters for what that's worth. Mr. Mayor, that's all I have for my presentation. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Davidson, Is there anyone else from the public here to speak in support of the application or with questions, concerns, or objections to the application? Anybody online?
No, sir.
Okay, and are there any written submissions that were not already discussed in the planning report, presentation, or oral submissions?
No, sir.
Okay, so then I'll ask if any committee members have final questions on the application before we close the public meeting to have our discussion on the applications. Questions only at this point, the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, and through you. It's a question just concerning the placement of the garage. Is the garage in the concept that was presented, is it sited to the west of the house because of challenges with putting a driveway in close to an intersection? It's just, as you look at the property, you know, there's the amenity space aspect. You know, I don't have concerns about the application overall, but I'm wondering if, is there a reason why the concept includes the garage there? Because are we limiting then any opportunity for a flipping of something that would enable people perhaps who would build there to have at least some space beside their house that's not adjacent to Huron Street, has kind of like a sort of side backyard? So and I understand it's just a concept and it's not, you know, a specific request for a building permit for that structure, but is that why the garage is sited on that side?
Planner?
Well, I'll maybe ask the consultant just to speak to how they came up with this specific concept, what some of the desires were there. But again, like you've said, it is a concept, and it's part of the reason we're here in front of council and not as a minor variance, because the desire was not to attach a specific site plan to this decision. So it is actually possible that if it's sold to someone else with a different idea, there could be a driveway from Huron Street, like that would be the frontage. Someone could design a house with a garage on the main floor and living space above. So there's nothing tying your decision tonight to this configuration.
I don't know then if the planner needs to speak. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't setting up something that prevented, you know, some flexibility there, because amenity space is good to have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Jake. My question is sort of along the same line. There's a comment that says that this would continue as low density with a one-story single detached house. So I guess what I'm asking is, how do we know that it's going to be one story? And you just mentioned yourself, it might be two-story.
Sure. Just for clarity, do you mean a comment in?
No, there's a comment in the report. The argument following from, this is a low-density, low-rise residential neighborhood. It would fit in with the neighborhood.
Unless I'm mistaken, I don't think there was a comment to say that the severed parcel would necessarily be a single story. This area has a provision in the zoning bylaw to restrict height to 8 meters, whereas 10 meters is the usual. So that effectively limits development to 2 stories. So there could conceptually be a 2-story dwelling built there.
Okay, are there further questions at this time before we close the public meeting? Seeing none, then I will now declare the public meeting to be closed, and I'll ask what I will do first before I ask that question is I will read the resolution. Give me one second here. So the resolution is that, subject to a review of submissions arising from the public meeting, the council approves zoning bylaw amendment Z 2024-066 for McIntosh and bylaw 07-2025. Is there a mover and seconder for that resolution? Councillor Grace and the Vice Deputy Mayor. Are there comments at this point before we consider the resolution, the Deputy Mayor? And then Councillor Halpin.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, just for clarification, the zoning on the newly created lot would be R1, but R1 now enables up to 4 residential units on one lot. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Halpin.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. I saw this come across the desk at Saugeen Valley for agency comments, and I wondered, well, why are we making a lot so small that they have to ask, to change setbacks and everything? But driving by and looking at it, it will still fit the character of the neighborhood. It's right next to the tourist park where there are virtually like very, very small setbacks from everything. And it does conserve land. So I feel like I can support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments at this time? I think it's a good application, a bit of residential infilling. Every house we build in the settlement areas, one more we don't have to stretch out onto other lands that we don't want to build on to build. So I think it's good to see that application. Yeah, the deputy mayor.
Again, just for clarification, the drawing that we received, and maybe this is, I don't know if I should have asked it earlier, but the location of the shed on the retained property, it doesn't, in my drive-by look, that shed appears to be much closer to the newly created lot, should that happen, than is evident on this drawing. Is the intention to move that shed?
Sorry, behind the current dwelling? Sorry, I could, maybe the agent could speak to that.
Does the agent for the applicant have an answer to that question?
I guess what I'm asking is, I think at some point there would have to be some consideration of the reduced setback for the detached dwelling that's on the retained lot. Is the shed in difficulty too with a setback requirement, I guess is what I'm asking.
I believe not. This was based on a surveyor. We requested that they have a survey do a draft site plan, so I feel quite confident in where things are presented. I don't believe there would be any new issues there.
Mr. Davidson.
Yes, what Jake has said is 100% right. Because we are concerned about where the house was located in proximity to the lot line, and we weren't entirely sure how big the property was, we had a formal survey prepared. And my drawing that you have in front of you is based on 100% on that draft survey that was prepared, so it is accurate.
Okay, if there's nothing else, then you've heard the resolution. It's been moved and seconded. I'll ask all in favor. That's carried. I can no longer see Councillor Halpin. Is he maybe disappeared on us? Okay, anyway, that is carried. So we'll move on now to item 7, which is reports of municipal officers, and one item there, which is the draft cultural heritage master plan, and the manager of planning and development has that report, and there he is online. Turn it over to you, Jay.
Yes, thank you. And I'm noticing our consultant is not online, but let's get there. Oh, there. Anyways, I will start by saying, Mayor Charbonneau, that the draft cultural heritage master plan in front of you, we're presenting and inviting our consultant Denise Horn to go through briefly, say 15 minutes, to outline the process and the 18 or so recommendations that are contained in the draft plan. And as a bit of a background here, at the beginning of 24, we engaged NPG Planning Solutions. We started consultation on the Engage Saugeen Shores platform and got input from the community using an online survey. Then Denise and team met with reps from Indigenous communities, Saugeen Ojibwe Nation and the historic Saugeen Métis and other interested groups, and then hosted also a drop-in at the museum on May 28th to gather more information and refine input. And then in September, we presented a first draft, I should say, to the Municipal Heritage Committee and got some input from committee. And comments that we received from committee have been included in this draft as appropriate. And I guess at this point, I just want to turn it over to Denise to outline the plan, and both of us jointly can help answer any questions or address comments you might have regarding the the 5 objectives and 18 recommendations that are outlined. So, Mr. Mayor, I guess if it's okay, turn it over to Denise to share screen and go through a presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and Council, for having me here this evening. Are you able to see the screen that I'm sharing?
Yes, we see it just fine.
Okay, wonderful. It's great to be here, even though it's only virtual. And I know this plan has been a long time coming, so it's great to be able to present to you the sort of draft final version this evening. I just want to note that it's been a real privilege to work with the community, and we've had a great experience with staff and heritage groups, with the Indigenous communities. So we've been very grateful for this experience. And I'll just note that our consulting team included NPG Planning Solutions, so myself, TMHC, which is Timmins Martell Heritage Consulting, Joshua Dent led the Indigenous community engagement, Dr. Carl Bray of Bray Heritage, and Dr. Marcus Letourneau of MR Letourneau and Associates, both of whom are cultural heritage specialists and have many years' experience in the field. So it was a pretty excellent team to work with through this process. So with that, I guess we'll just quickly touch on the project timeline, although Jay's already given you an overview of that. So thank you, Jay. And then we'll walk a little bit through the master plan, and I'll just sort of highlight a couple of sections to give you a sense of why we've incorporated certain sections. And then, of course, we'll jump into the objectives and actions. So Jay's already given you a sense of the timelines. The project kicked off early in January with staff. And since then, we've done quite a bit of consultation, as Jay noted, online and in person as well with Indigenous communities, and then an in-person workshop as well with certain heritage advocacy groups that are very active. And since we sort of prepped the draft Cultural Heritage Master Plan, we've also taken more time to consult with the county and then ongoing Indigenous consultation and engagement as well. So that's gotten us to where we are now, which is sort of this final draft, I guess I'll say. And so I'll just note that the Heritage Master Plan opens with a description of the community and an overview of cultural heritage resources generally, and sort of as they've been understood in Saugeen Shores and as they've been celebrated in Saugeen Shores. So the purpose of the plan was really to provide a foundation and preliminary framework for strengthening municipal conservation actions. A review of community processes and practices demonstrated that there was a need for a more robust cultural heritage planning framework with clear objectives and policies to address basically the existing realities within the community. And so to fulfill the mandate, we did consultation, as I've outlined. And so it was sort of through the consultation and engagement processes and our work with staff and advocacy groups that we developed the vision, which is that the town of Saugeen Shores would have in place an up-to-date suite of legislative policy and process tools that would enable it to strategically manage, conserve, and meaningfully commemorate its cultural heritage resources. These were things that we were hearing through our engagement sessions, that there was more of an appetite for this from community members. And with this vision, we developed the strategic objectives for cultural heritage planning in Saugeen Shores. And then, of course, each objective is supported by an action item. So these are the 5 primary objectives that we've outlined. And so just to give you a basic overview, maintaining compliance with the legislative framework for cultural heritage resources. That's because there's been significant legislative change in the last few years. So there's a need to sort of review processes and practices municipally. And then improving processes. So this is a commitment to update internal and public processes for efficiency, for standardization and consistency, and even for clarity for residents, for applicants. And then objective 3, to build capacity. So this is really all about ongoing training for council, for your municipal heritage committee, for staff, committing to helping everyone to stay abreast of the situation, basically of the planning environment that we are currently in. Expanding lines of communication is really all about strong collaborative projects and meaningful partnerships. And we know that this has been going on at the county level. And we know that Saugeen Shores as well has been working towards expanding lines of communication with Indigenous communities. And then developing a Saugeen Shores approach to conservation. So there's an opportunity here to collaborate with local groups because there are quite a few in the community that take an active role and want to participate. So those are sort of the basis of the objectives. So then the Heritage Master Plan goes into the legislative and policy framework. And I know that often is a point where, policy isn't always interesting, but it's important. And it's important because there's, like I said, there's been significant legislative changes to the Ontario Heritage Act, to the Planning Act, to many pieces of provincial legislation. And in order to know where we want to go, we have to sort of know what our starting point is. So just to note, cultural heritage is a matter of federal, provincial, and Indigenous interest. And I've sort of laid out the key pieces of policy documents and legislation that Saugeen Shores should be aware of as it moves forward and plans for its own cultural heritage planning framework. So the reason that this section is important is because council's the decision makers in the communities, right? And it's also important to in the community. So it's important to understand how the varying pieces of legislation relate to one another, how they reinforce one another. And I guess just as an example, the Planning Act in Ontario establishes that cultural heritage is a matter of provincial interest. And so councils are directed to have regard for cultural heritage when they make decisions on applications under the Planning Act. And similarly, the Planning Act implements in Section 3 the provincial planning statement. And so the PPS, the provincial planning statement, is what provides specific policies for the conservation of cultural heritage. So while sometimes we might sort of fall into the trap of thinking it's only the Ontario Heritage Act that is relevant for cultural heritage planning, that's not the case. There is a much broader framework of which we need to be aware and in which we need to plan. So just generally, heritage in Saugeen Shores, this section sort of deals with a few sections of the report. So you'll note that there was some reference to the historical context overview report, Landscape, Lake, and Ways of Life in Saugeen Shores, which outlined larger historical, economic, social, and cultural processes that influenced growth and change in Saugeen Shores. And it's important because the historical, associative, and contextual values, the values of heritage places, right, can be more strongly perceived when there is a sense of the larger historical context. And it's important to keep in mind because some of the heritage designating bylaws that the town has previously put in place are not detailed. And so this is important because the historical context overview is an opportunity for us to sort of step back and say, okay, how can we revisit those designation bylaws and set them within some of these historical themes to establish value as per the Ontario Heritage Act criteria for designation. But the historical context overview is also important because it's an exercise in stepping back and reviewing what secondary sources are saying about Saugeen Shores. And after that assessment, the town can start to identify gaps in stories that are told, in voices that are heard, and perspectives that are provided, so that you can sort of better understand, where more work can be done to allow more voices to speak about cultural heritage resources in the community. So the goal here is that the town can build on the historical context overview to further establish important themes that inform the community's understanding. And that means that the town is setting the narrative, right? So rather than having somebody from outside, when you have heritage reports that come in, heritage impact assessments or heritage evaluation reports, they often have an overview of what's important in the community. But if the town takes an active role in saying, we've got a historical context overview that we've adopted, and this is something where we've highlighted key themes, then the town is saying, this is what's important to us. And it means that others that are coming in are working within that framework. So heritage conservation measures in Saugeen Shores considers how cultural heritage planning has been undertaken in Saugeen Shores to date. And it relates to the larger cultural heritage planning framework in Ontario. including how case law has impacted heritage planning. And this section is important because lessons can be learned from these decisions to prevent the town from opening themselves up to unnecessary risk and just from learning what has happened in other municipalities. So it's a good exercise in stepping back and saying, okay, what processes and practices have we as a town undertaken, and what has been learned by others, so that we can ensure that we're following best practices and what's been recommended and established within court decisions. And then the protected heritage property, which are designated heritage properties under the Ontario Heritage Act, is sort of just an overview of all the properties that have been identified, with a note that there is an ability here and a need to update those designation bylaws for clarity and to assure that they are afforded full protection under the Ontario Heritage Act. So community engagement was really sort of subsumed within Section 6, but which was more about the historical context overview. And I want to note that the reason that it's important is because the historical context overview, as I mentioned, is, okay, what are the important historical themes that have gone on, and what are the current protected heritage properties that sort of relate to those themes? What's important about engagement now is it's asking the community the question of, what do you value today? What holds value for you, and why does it hold value for you? And this is a big exercise. So that's what the online engagement and the in-person engagement was meant to sort of achieve, was to say, tell us what's important, have the major themes been addressed? What other stories and heritage resources need to be identified and be told and recognized? So online and in-person engagement was undertaken with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation and the historic Saugeen Métis, as well as local community groups and organizations. And the engagement identified common themes in Saugeen Shores and elements that represented those themes. And you'll see that in the master plan on, I think it's page 33 of the PDF. Figure 9 is a graphic representation of that. So the themes are in the middle, and then the elements that represent the themes of marine history, natural heritage, Indigenous heritage, agricultural heritage, and more are sort of shown in the larger circle outside that. And the reason that this is important as an exercise is because these are the places that provide Saugeen Shores with its sense of place, that define the community character. And there's a lot of discussion of character in the town's official plan. So we'll come back to that. And so some of those sort of components are, recognition of the historic architecture, the beaches, Chantry Island, and the Saugeen River. So it's sort of direction for how the town can sort of start to proactively identify and evaluate new cultural heritage resources. And it's a gap exercise for gaining community input on what matters now, so that town initiatives can plan ahead for what's valued. It's an exercise in inventorying places and recognizing what should be protected, so new development does not detract or destroy cultural heritage resources or heritage places, especially given the legislative framework the planning environment that we're in that promotes density and intensification within urban areas. So what was clear from our engagement is that Saugeen Shores has a really strong track record for telling stories in the community. And there's been many efforts to do it, including, through Pioneer Park, which has a lot of the plaques and tells various stories, around Fairy Lake, which also has plaques, and the Heritage House plaque programs. These are just a few of the initiatives that tell those stories. And commemoration is important, but it doesn't equate to protection. Protection of heritage places is important because heritage resources truly are non-renewable resources. Once they're lost, once they're demolished, they're gone forever, right? So this is sort of a recognition that council should consider a variety of tools to protect heritage resources moving forward in order to balance growth and development with sense of place, which is provided by those heritage resources. And implementing more tools will assist the town in being proactive in regard to its cultural heritage resources rather than reactionary, as proposed or as sort of recommended in the provincial planning statement. It also will ensure that the it'll help to address the sort of the laments we heard across communities from engagement, right? Fears about loss of community character with redevelopment and demolition, and requests for more proactive engagement with the municipality prior to municipal works or initiatives. So it's also noted that differing character was recognized between places such as Port Elgin, Southampton, or Port and South, as they were sometimes referred to, and the rural area. And it's okay that there are different conservation strategies tailored to the needs of each community. That is definitely something that should be explored. And then I'll just note that in engaging with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation and the historic Saugeen Métis, this is a first step. The engagement during this plan was conducted in a manner that built on previous town and Bruce County engagement and informs future town engagement with Indigenous communities. And it needs to continue even beyond this process. So that sort of takes us, I think, probably to the meat of the discussion or the meeting this evening, which really is the objectives and the actions. And so there are sort of three pillars that we identified as really kind of underpinning the objectives. They sort of, you'll sort of see them represented variously through the different objectives. So the three pillars are legal and ethical obligations. So, what should the town be doing legally and ethically? Operational and implementation realities. So what are those, right? What are those for the town? And then the aspirations within the local context. So that's like the goals and objectives of the community. And all of these three sort of matters need to be considered within larger contextual considerations for Saugeen Shores specifically. So I'll just note that with the objectives, each objective contains a strategy, which is the why and how for each objective, and a recommended action and an action plan, which is the chart and the timelines. The timelines are not the length of time that it would take to actually finalize these recommendations. It's the point at which the town might start these recommendations, because of course there are other actions, other initiatives that the town has ongoing, and they may change given the other needs and priorities of the town. So there are timelines for 0 to 5 months, 6 to 11 months, and then beyond 12 months. Also outlined are those who should be responsible for undertaking the action items and partners in the communities that can assist the town, because there's quite a bit to be done. So it's always great to have the support of others. And it's recommended that the town assess progress towards achieving the objectives, maybe in sort of 2-year intervals, providing an overview of here's how far we've come with meeting the objectives and the actions, and then a review in 5 to 10 years, sort of depending on how much more legislative change we see in the next few years. So objective 1 is for maintaining compliance within the legislative framework for cultural heritage resources. So the specific recommendations are to update official plan policies for cultural heritage. And you'll note that in the appendix, our team has done that. So what we did was we took the existing official plan and we updated policies to, for the sake of terminology, so there was some outdated terminology, and to generally recommend things such as establishing best practice, reliance on best practice, which includes that demolition is not a first practice, and which includes that following the standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada as a best practice guidance document for making decisions about heritage places or on heritage applications. So that is attached to your appendix, so that a lot of that work has been done. It's of course recognized that the town is going to be updating or is updating its official plan. And that might be an opportunity for council to really start to sort of delve into if there are more specific recommendations or focuses that they want to take forward. So we've also noted, so number 2 under objective 1 is adopt a template to evaluate cultural heritage resources. We've also provided that as given how much legislative change there's been and that there are mandatory requirements now for what is required for evaluations, this is a great starting point. So you'll also find an evaluation recording form at the end of in the appendices of this master plan. Identifying a variety of tools for conservation. So this is important just because, again, it's easy to fall back on the fact that the Ontario Heritage Act is sort of one of the primary ways and probably one of the strongest ways to protect and manage cultural heritage resources. But there are other tools, and under various pieces of legislation, also under the Planning Act, that Saugeen Shores can think about, again, as you move forward in your official plan process, bringing a diversity of tools for conservation. Oh, apologies. So I've already alluded to the fact that the designating bylaws for the town should be sort of revisited and updated in order to meet the criteria that, or the format, I should say, that is now required under the Ontario Heritage Act. And I guess I'll just note, and the reason for that is because some of the old bylaws do not actually recognize heritage attributes and do not provide statements of heritage value. And protection is based on heritage attributes and heritage value. So if you want to afford protection for those resources, that'll be a good first step, is revisiting the existing bylaws. And then prioritizing properties for designation from the Heritage Register. So many municipalities right now are working towards that January 1st, 2027 deadline before properties are removed from the Heritage Register. So this speaks to also the PPS recommendation for proactive strategies to conserve built heritage resources and cultural heritage landscapes, right? So having a strong basis for prioritizing what properties from the Heritage Register should be moved to designation over the next 2 years. So objective 2 is improving processes. There's a lot of quite a few sort of sub-recommendations for improving internal processes. And again, it's pretty much related to a lot of the changes we've seen in the legislative environment. And some of them are quite simple. Others might take time. So staff might be able to do some of these things. Consultants may be needed or support in other ways. But developing a heritage permit application form is one. We've done that for you. It's also in the appendix of the master plan. It's a starting point, right, for you to collect the key information that's required under the Ontario Heritage Act. And it's good to adopt that as a council and then put it on the website, the town website, for access to ensure that when you're getting heritage permits in, they're complete, because you are required to review and serve notice of complete application. Developing terms of reference for key heritage studies is great. That way you know that you're getting fulsome studies that meet minimum standards. And then timelines for processing heritage applications. There's a lot of now interconnectivity between the Planning Act and the Ontario Heritage Act that sort of puts timelines on when you can and cannot designate, right? So those are things that council needs to think about, and that staff needs to ensure that they can work efficiently when they're dealing with both Planning Act applications and potential heritage properties. I won't go through I think the full sub list. I'm happy to take questions, but I think many of them are quite self-explanatory. So we'll move to managing cemeteries and burial places. We heard from quite a few people that there was concerns about what to do with the cemeteries. I think that's a wide-ranging question for a lot of communities. And many have started to think about how they can sort of address cemeteries. One approach is a heritage cemetery plan and official plan policies to be concerted around historic cemeteries. So that's certainly something that can be considered and followed up with. Building capacity is really, as I mentioned, about staff training and committee training, giving opportunities for heritage committee members to attend basically conferences that are organized. There are many that are organized throughout the year. Some municipalities provide funding for 1 or 2 heritage committee members to attend these, so that you're hearing the most up-to-date challenges from other communities at these conferences, right? And how they're addressing key issues. There's also sometimes free training through Community Heritage Ontario previously, and even the ministry through Bert Duclos used to do quite a bit of training for heritage committees, so that at the start of each term for heritage committees, they have an understanding of sort of the basic legislative framework and what heritage committees are what they typically do as advisory committees to council. Another recommendation that Saugeen Shores could consider is developing a training manual. So that's a written document that basically outlines all the roles of council, of heritage committee, of staff in a document, of the town's policies. It's really a basis for, it's almost like a 101 for how heritage is managed in Saugeen Shores. And that can be a living document that you sort of update as policies change. It's a great, it's sort of a great onboarding document, right? When you're bringing new Heritage Committee members on board. And then reassessing staff capacity. There's a lot of recommendations here. There's work to be done. And it's not just cultural heritage planning, but of course, land use planning under the Planning Act staff. Our municipal staff are busy everywhere. And so it's good to sort of take a step back and sort of say, okay, how can we sort of best and most efficiently achieve what we're putting forward as our objectives here? So just a recognition of staff there and what they might need. Expanding lines of communication is one that sort of really came quite a bit out of our Indigenous consultation and engagement. So we wanted to highlight that. Currently, the official plan doesn't have an Indigenous engagement policy or protocols, and those are recommended to be considered for the new official plan. There's also consideration for potentially establishing Indigenous community representation on the Heritage Committee. So what some Heritage Committees do in other communities is they highlight, that there are sort of certain roles that they would like to see filled, and those are sort of offered first so that underrepresented communities or groups have an opportunity to participate at the table. So this is really a recommendation to say there's an opportunity here for there to be Indigenous representation. And it's not just for cultural heritage resources that might have value to Indigenous communities, but it's also a different way of seeing, right, different perspectives that you'd be hearing. And number 3, facilitate discussion of cross-sector heritage goals and issues. There's suggestions there about how we can sort of start to bring together different groups, promote community organizations to come together. One thing that we heard when we did our engagement and our workshops was that it's sort of one of the first times that various local groups and communities had been in a room together, talking about their joint efforts towards heritage, their successes, their challenges, their goals. So promoting opportunities for that is great. And some communities do that through biannual council hosting biannual community engagement sessions. Oftentimes councils will have done that with certain topics that they specifically would like addressed, and community members are invited to come in and discuss that. So it's sort of just one option that council could think about to start to hear from these different community groups. And then finally, objective 5, developing a Saugeen Shores approach to conservation. Maybe that seems pretty obvious, but it's always good to step back and say, what are the assets that Saugeen Shores has? What are the groups that can support the town in meeting and council in meeting its goals and aspirations? And so this is really about building alliances with different community groups and working with the local business improvement association to think about how cultural heritage resources, for instance, in Port Elgin, perhaps, how that downtown core, which does have some heritage resources still, how the BIA can support basically ongoing sort of investment or just promotion of respect for built heritage and new development that respects built heritage. So, and the BIA, I think, hadn't really been involved too much in heritage before, but you clearly have a very active BIA, and there's an opportunity there. Defining, coordinating, and promoting rural heritage. So I'll recognize now that there wasn't a whole lot of representation from the rural community through engagement, but I think it's definitely our recommendation that there is further consideration for rural communities and their heritage. In rural communities, cultural heritage is often directly tied to ongoing farm or traditional practices, which sustain their ongoing agricultural practices. Farm families in rural communities deserve an opportunity to identify, define, and sustain their cultural heritage. The ability for cultural heritage to remain relevant and sustainable would be, is integral. So it's opening up that conversation. But recognizing that the rural heritage, I'll say the rural area does fall under the county official plan. So there's sort of some coordination needed with county official plan policy direction as well. Connecting with youth was something we felt pretty strongly about. We heard from quite a few groups that there's some really active and engaged youth in the community who are bright and want to be involved. And so there's an opportunity here to sort of really tap into that and give youth opportunities to see how they can affect change in their community. And I think one of the ways that that was done was there was a newspaper article that spoke a little bit about Fairy Lake and how students from GC Houston had put up lights around Fairy Lake through the wintertime to sort of brighten up that place, and recognizing it's a community gathering place. It's very central to the community. That's one sort of beautiful way that council has, heard what students and youth are saying and affected change in a way that they feel that they've contributed to a heritage place, and that sustains youth value of that place, right? They're seeing that they're able to voice their opinions about that place. And that's really important. And then defining community character. So there's, as I noted in the official plan, there's quite a few references to community character. And community character can be a challenging sort of concept, and it can be challenging to speak to it in reports. And I guess I'll just note that, so I'll give you a for instance. So, if basically community character has to be defined in some way, and there's various ways of doing it. So character areas are an example. You can define an area that has specific community character, i.e. Grosvenor Street. Maybe it has a certain built character and a certain form that makes it feel very pleasant to walk that street, and you sort of feel like you're stepping back in time. It has a very specific feel and unique feel that is very different than other areas. But if you haven't defined community character in some kind of document, there's been some sort of approaches to it in the urban design guidelines that the community has noted. If you haven't defined it, you can't defend it. So at the OLT, if you say, well, there's a certain character, they're going to say, well, what is that character and what does it look like? And so council needs to take an active role in defining it. And so the example that I would use for you that we had in a community was, we were taking the position as the town that there was a certain character along a streetscape, and there was 3 sort of heritage buildings that were all side by side that had a very deep setback. And we said there's heritage value to that setback. And the reason is because it's in response to a creek that used to run down the road. So there's a very specific reason why they were set back. And so the proposal for change was to add on to the front of the buildings, because there was no room at the rear, to bring those houses closer to the street. And we said, we can't, in our opinion, that's a negative impact on a cultural heritage resource, because you're changing that character defining attribute. And then we had an outside consultant. So that was our sort of stance was, well, look, a lot of heritage buildings are set close to the street, but these ones are set back. There's a unique character there, and we want to preserve that. But we had an outside consultant come in for the developer and say, well, actually, from an urban design perspective, the character is that there's a whole lot of variation along this street. So buildings have a variety of setbacks. So actually, this is a good thing, because it's adding more variety to the streetscape, right? So character from an urban design perspective is very different than character from a heritage perspective. So heritage character isn't only about heritage, but heritage can be the basis for character. And with that, it's good to sort of think about specific tools that address that character and recognize that character in municipally adopted documents, so that it's clear to developers and the community and defensible at the Ontario Land Tribunal as well. That's where I'll close my presentation. Sorry, Jay, that might have been more than 15 minutes. So I apologize, but thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that time. And I am, of course, happy to engage in dialogue and answer any questions.
And
Sure,
Mayor
thank you very
Charbonnet,
much.
before it goes, can I
Oh, yeah.
just outline the next steps? I meant to do that earlier, but I think it's important that you hear. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say following the comments from council tonight, we're just asking you to provide your comments on this and perhaps highlight what if there's issues, you tell us and we can go away. Because what we're going to do is post it on Engage Saugeen Shores for further public review, and then we're going to circulate the draft plan to various parties for further comment, including Indigenous peoples, and then return to council with a final draft for adoption, considering any changes that are identified here or concerns that are identified here and over the next little while. And at the same time, we'd like to bring back an implementation schedule and costing, because implementing these, they're not in our business plan, apart from the carryover, the cultural heritage official plan amendment that was, I think we can commit to doing early on, if that's something council wants us to do. But we want to have an implementation schedule brought back as well. So thank you.
Great, thank you. So there is a resolution that council direct the cultural heritage master plan be brought back to a future meeting incorporating feedback provided by council. As mover and seconder, the Vice Deputy Mayor, Councillor Grace. Questions or comments to the resolution? We'll start with the Vice Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Grace.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your presentation. And this is just a great start. And I remember back 5 years ago, I think we talked about the cultural heritage master plan, and here we are today. So sometimes you just have to wait a little bit of time for a good package like this to come forward. Just a couple things. I was really pleased to see on page 33 about the Saugeen River, where we talk about the graphic image showing the important components of cultural heritage, and so we all know the significance of Saugeen River with Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, and of course the historic Saugeen Métis. The question I have is about the Saugeen River. A couple things. Are there provisions in this plan where tools that we as a council will be provided with and staff to talk about heritage districts? I'm talking about neighborhoods where there's one or more properties of heritage significance. This and former council talked about heritage districts, and I guess will it provide tools for that? And secondly, when we talk about the Saugeen River, mouth of the Saugeen River, and you talk about historic Saugeen Métis, is that a different terminology when you talk about a heritage district in a neighborhood versus significance in terms of the Saugeen River? What's the difference? What's the different terminology you use when we talk about heritage districts versus the significance of the Saugeen River? And can we flesh that out further when we talk about the heritage significance of the Saugeen River? We can, I guess, do anything we wish, but declare that as a significant piece of landscape that we can build into our heritage plan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the questions. They're great questions. Yeah, heritage conservation districts are often associated with collections of buildings, and I wonder if what you're thinking of is the cultural heritage landscape concept. So when it comes to the Saugeen River, cultural heritage landscapes are really about more like very strongly about how people sort of relate to and use places. And that includes, it can include natural components and viewscapes, could include archaeological resources, but it essentially sort of thinks, I think, a little bit more holistically. It's more of a holistic approach to considering where value resides, and it talks a lot about the interrelated meanings and associations between things. So I think if you're between sort of elements, I guess I'll say. And so if you're talking about the Saugeen River, everybody here recognizes that many communities attribute value to the Saugeen River, perhaps for different reasons, but it has very strong meaning to the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, and I think as well the historic Saugeen Métis have deep connections, and it was important obviously for early development here in the town, and it continues to be important for leisure activities and things, right? So you might think about that concept, the cultural heritage landscape. The sort of drawback of the cultural heritage landscape is it can be difficult to implement it over multiple properties. So that's sort of where the heritage district idea comes in, where, as you noted, you can have multiple properties. But before you sort of proceed down, I think, identifying a tool, it would be very good to step back and do what we've done through the master plan, which is to start to engage with communities and say, what is the value, and what do you value about it from the past? What do you value about it today? And then with gaining that information, you can start to say, what is the best tool for recognizing the value of the Saugeen River? Is it as a cultural heritage landscape designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act? Is it as a Heritage Conservation District HCD? Or perhaps is it official plan policies that speak to the fact that this is a unique resource in the community, and then a policy basis for protecting and conserving or maintaining the Saugeen River? So that might be another option, is official plan policies. But in short, yes, there are a variety of policy tools that are outlined for council's consideration
Tools.
for ongoing protection and
The tools are available. I appreciate it. Just a couple more quick ones, if I might. There's about 60 amendments to the draft official plan amendments, which is interesting. There were a lot, and I guess my question is, they all came from who and where? And I guess it was from the public meetings, was it? From the result of the changes to the Intermunicipal Act in regards to heritage, rather? Where did all those 60 amendments, how did you flesh all those out? I guess is my question.
we went, like, how did we flesh them out of the official plan? We went through policy by policy and identified where there had been significant legislative change, and therefore where the policies really needed to be updated in order to be defensible. Does that answer your question clearly?
Yes, it does. I just wonder where I mean, there's a lot, there's 60
There's a
amendments.
lot.
And I guess when we recently did the official plan update, this is what, Jay, I guess you were referring to, was doing these amendments in stages, in pockets, because it's a lot to consider when you're looking at 60 amendments. So I guess that's the theory, Jay, is it through you is to take these in little pockets when we're talking about updating official plan? There's a
Well,
lot of changes.
through you, Mayor, I think we committed to providing a couple things in the 24 business plan. One is the Cultural Heritage Master Plan, and the second was doing an official plan amendment. And so the exercise we asked our consultant to do is review the OP and tell us where we need to change. I think one lesson I took from over the last 17 years is we can't try to do the whole official plan at once. So having a discrete set of changes focused directly on cultural heritage, take that away and do that as one exercise. It's a lot easier to manage, a lot better process, and a little easier to digest from without condescension. It's for the community and for everyone that has to be involved. Having a discrete set, as 60 as they are, but they're all focused on cultural heritage, is easier than trying to do it as the whole official plan.
So Jay, we'll have a chance, would it be March, April, May? When will I guess the amendments will come forth for the discussion? When?
Well, I mean, I certainly want to get a temperature read from council tonight on that. So looking forward to any comments you might have. Okay. But then we would start I could engage the county right away and try to bring the official plan very soon after adoption of the Cultural Heritage Master Plan, because I do know it was in the business plan from last year and we want to get it done, but obviously wanting to ensure that the 25 business plan work is also not ignored. So
just about the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation and historic Saugeen Métis, was there good representation from both organizations, like from both SON and from Saugeen, historic Saugeen Métis? Was there pretty good representation at public meetings and submissions, and was it pretty fair between the two?
Through the mayor, yes, there was good representation. We are still working to follow up with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation on sort of this final draft, I guess I would say. There's been a few changes, so there's going to be more follow-up there. We have reached out, and we're sort of hoping to connect a little bit further. But yes, we did connect directly with those communities and one-on-one.
Okay, well, thanks very much again. I know Councillor Grace got about 3 pages of questions, I see, and our deputy mayor's got lots. But thanks. I think it's a great start. And say 5 years ago we started this process, and here we are today. So I think we're going to end up with a really, really good end product. So thanks for your great work.
Thank you. I expect Councillor Grace's questions. It's all one question on 3 pages, I think. So anyway, we'll see. Councillor Grace.
I'll try to be as succinct as possible. Thank you, Jay and Denise, for the report. My first question is about the historical context overview report. Will that be published? Will that be attached as an appendix to the main report?
Yeah, the Director of Development Services, or Manager.
Oh, okay. Mark could answer it too as director, but
Okay.
I think that we certainly have been discussing internally whether it could form as an appendix. I think I'm of two minds. One is I don't want it to be a static document, so if you include it as an appendix and it's adopted, that's it. And it could still be part of as an appendix as long as we're upfront, is that we really wanted to see as a living document, because some other comments we heard recently are that, well, what about the town's nuclear history? That might be important to the town. How do we consider that? And I think so. I think what we're trying to take away, but before we come back with the final version, is how do we best use that report, and how do we show how it could be a living document within the plan, whether that's an appendix, whether that's just a tool the Heritage Committee has to sort of take on. We're not sure how that might end up being another recommendation. So,
okay. Well, my request is that even if it is a living document, that it please be updated for accuracy. My next, and part of this, we talked a lot about the importance of tying built heritage in with, history and culture and everything. And I did ask Jay a question this afternoon about, I thought we should be including the fact that the range lights and Chantry Island Lighthouse and the Lightkeeper's Cottage are all federally designated properties. I know they're not provincially designated, but I don't see, I'd like to see it included, because I think a lot of people have questions. I mean, Chantry Island Lighthouse is iconic. I mean, it's on practically everything you see. And I could see people looking at this and saying, where's the lighthouse? Why isn't that there? Or the range light, which, our Marine Heritage Society just won an award for the restoration of that, the front range light. So to me, I would love to see that included in the report somewhere, just as information, at least to tell people, hey, there is designation. It's not provincial, but it is recognized, and it's very, very important. Can I just keep going? I really was intrigued by the discussion on form-based zoning, the alternative to more traditional types of zoning, which emphasizes the physical character of development that's been recently integrated into the City of Ottawa's zoning bylaw. I would really love to see us explore more of that. I also know that this is something that the deputy mayor has been working on for years, but the Heritage Tree Program, and hopefully we can go back to working on that as part of the Heritage Committee's work plan for this term. And I'm interested in guidance on how we go about prioritizing properties for designation, because that's something that the past Heritage Committee for the last couple of years has been working hard on designating properties, and I really welcome that. Question related to that, because I know you've talked about the fact that we really do need to update our designation bylaw. Do we have to go back and update the information on previously designated properties up until these 4 that have been done in the last 2 years?
Through the mayor, even the most recent bylaws should be revisited because there is provisions now in the Ontario Heritage Act that heritage attributes need to be tied directly back to the statement of heritage value and what they represent. And that's new. I mean, it's new as of 2021, but many municipalities wouldn't have didn't do that in the past, right? There was a statement of cultural heritage value or interest in the list of heritage attributes, and now what the province is saying is, no, you have to show that what you're saying is a heritage attribute, in fact, supports the statement of cultural heritage value or interest, so we can see the connection. So the property owners and really in the public understands how they're interrelated, and therefore what negative impacts might be if one is changed. So yes, I think the best process would be to go back and, like, in my opinion, there is an ability that you can amend designating bylaws, but that's for very specific reasons. My recommendation would be not to de-designate, but to start to move new designation bylaws for the properties that you already have, and see what heritage research you have to substantiate those designations, and then to write the statements of cultural heritage value or interest and write the heritage attributes list. So to write the bylaws, right? And then after, once those are approved, to then go back and de-designate, like remove the old designation bylaws. And that can definitely be done in concert with property owners, right? It's always great to be able to work cooperatively with property owners on that.
Okay, thank you. We'll have to take that away. One thing I wanted to mention about youth connections, your report did talk about the crosswalk, which was the work of Councillor Davinsky here, getting that done in cooperation with GC Houston and SON. But I think our report should also talk about the annual bridge celebration. I mean, and the renaming of the bridge. That was an amazing cross-curricular project by GC Houston students and administration, in concert again with SON. And that is now an annual celebration on the National Day of Reconciliation every year. And that deserves some mention, I think, in our report. So thank you very much.
That was quick. The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of questions and some comments. As an initial question, the 60 or so updates to the OP that the Vice Deputy Mayor mentioned, has that information gone to the Municipal Heritage Committee yet? That wasn't included in what they saw back when I was at that meeting where we talked about the draft plan. So they haven't seen. Okay. I had the answer from over my shoulder here. I'm at the time that the Municipal Heritage Committee saw the draft of this Cultural Heritage Master Plan, I did make some comments. Unfortunately, I don't see that a lot of what was talked about at our committee sort of was picked up in this document that's before us. And it was me, one of the people that suggested about including some things as an appendix rather than in the body. And the context that Councillor Grace was mentioning and asking whether it would be an appendix or not, it is in the body of the document. What I find very difficult about this document is it's 130 pages. And really when you get into it, it's 80 to 90% focused on legal and ethical stuff and designation of property. And, you know, it's unfortunately you have to read through an awful lot of historical information, which is valid and certainly an interesting read, before you actually sort of get to, well, what are they even thinking about doing and what's important to do. It's a very hard document to understand what we really care about. The Vice Deputy Mayor mentioned, you know, 5 or 6 years ago, this first we first started to hear about a cultural and heritage master plan. It goes back to the Southampton Town Hall Ad Hoc Committee, which Councillor Grace and I sat on. A number of members from the community did. Duncan McCallum, Tony Sheard, Kendall Sawyer, a number of people were there. And when we came to council with the results of that committee's work, we were held up with this, well, there's no plan. How are we supposed to decide how to invest in the town hall? Unfortunately, so anyway, my understanding of this document was, you know, it generated, the idea generated from, we need something that encourages, enables, or otherwise supports investment in the Southampton Town Hall, among other things. I don't see any of that in here. And so maybe I'm missing something, but I feel that that's a missed opportunity, because that's, in my opinion, why we started this whole process years ago anyway, was to find ways to inform the community about the justification and the value of investment, in particular in the Southampton Town Hall. I don't see, to me, this document is very much focused on designating properties. And to the Vice Deputy Mayor's comment about the Saugeen River, there is some language in here about a heritage character area. So I know you use the expression a landscape something or other, and the conservation district. This heritage character area, I think, has opportunities in a number of different directions in the community, but it's not really the focus of this document. This document is very much based, I believe, on designating property. And I have a great deal of respect for heritage in our community. I was hopeful that this document would help us celebrate it, would encourage public investment, would provide some support for conservation, and, also, deal with the Heritage Register and designated properties. So Heritage Register is listed properties, designated properties are different. I don't see the document picking up on a whole lot more than designating properties. And I have some fundamental concerns that I would encourage all my council colleagues to really give it a good read, because what has, in my opinion, ever since I got elected to council, been part of the heritage mix here has been that council has been encouraging and supportive, but we've always looked to a property owner to play a role in that. I don't see that in this document. Property owners are very rarely mentioned. The property owner involvement in the process is in some cases third down the list. There's an opportunity here, I think, with some of these applications that are being presented, to have a third party applicant to designate somebody else's property. That's concerning to me. So we should all be very careful with the way we read this, because fundamentally, this would be a big shift in the way that this council over time has looked at heritage properties. We've always wanted to have supportive property owners. And so we've kind of attacked the issue with communication and celebration and that sort of thing. This is setting up a very different kind of possibility here, that we can say we want to designate something. That's one thing, we meaning council. It's saying that a property owner can put in their own thing, but it's enabling a third party applicant. I don't really understand what that means, and that's concerning to me. There's an awful lot of costs associated with some aspects of this plan too, in terms of what someone would potentially have to do to either get the designation application or a heritage permit. I'm a little confused on what both of them are, but also even to alter or do anything with an existing designated property. There's an awful big, long list of potential technical studies and other kinds of reports that might be possible. There's no indication of costs there. That's a bit concerning to me too. There's reference in the document to archaeological aspects within the community that can trigger this, trigger that, whatever. Unfortunately, I don't know if we really are very transparent with showing the community what that map looks like. I have seen a map with some dots on it for, in particular, Southampton, but I know there's a few dots on a map in Port Elgin too, which are those known archaeology sites. We don't provide that information to the public in a meaningful way. I think some people would be happy to see it. Some other people would be very surprised to see, where their property lies in terms of some archaeological dot on a map that may have some dramatic impact should they ever want to do anything on their property. I do think that, there's some language in here about council acting without the support of the property owner, as I've mentioned. There's reference to us, council, enabling a site visit authorization bylaw, which, would enable if a third party or something triggered some sort of heritage permit, my reading of this document would suggest that our bylaw, our authorization bylaw would enable somebody to literally knock on a property owner's door and say, hey, I have the authority to go in here. We haven't done that outside of some building stuff. So that again is an area that I think we need to really understand what that means before we keep going down that route. I noticed also that there was language in here about for a listed property. And, you know, I, as a member of the Heritage Committee over a long time, was really very supportive and encouraging about the celebration of history and the building of that heritage register with listed properties. My understanding used to be that one of the limitations was if somebody who had a listed property applied for a demolition permit, you know, that there was a slight delay in the authorization of that, which could enable council to do something. I'm seeing now in this, and maybe it's just something in the new legislation, that it's not just a slight delay. It really is that they have to provide 60 days notice. And, you know, again, I'm a little unclear on what that means. There's an awful lot in here that to me is us getting our business into the business of private property owners in ways that we haven't up until now. And in fact, with many of the development conversations and housing conversations we've had during this term of council, we've been doing what we can do to kind of remove ourselves from some of that activity to make things easier for a property owner, less costly for a property owner. So I have some concerns. I do want to say that my suggestion for the report, and it has been made before, is I find the document interesting to read, but it's 130 pages and it's, you got to get almost to the end for the sort of nitty gritty stuff that, you know, talks about some real action items and some potentials. I find it hard to read because definitions are spaced throughout the document. I think at the Heritage Committee, I'd suggested a definition list up front or has a glossary at the back. I, you know, would like the document to be a little more succinct in terms of the content associated very specifically with the plan. And all of the background information, I think, belongs in an appendix. I understand what Jay is saying. However, I do think that it complicates the document to have it be so wordy up front, and that information is static information in many ways, so it could be supported by just inclusion at the back. I wanted to ask a question too, and maybe this is a question for Candace or perhaps Jake from the county. There's a reference, just as you get towards the end, there's when the rural stuff comes in, and I applaud that kind of thing being in here. However, there's references to the settlement area and that sort of thing. Can I just ask a question? Now, we have the ability to have an awful lot to say about what goes on in the settlement area. If a property was coming up for potential designation that's outside the settlement area, is that our sort of thing, or is that a county thing? How does outside the settlement area fit into something like this, which is very focused on designation? I'm curious about that. But my basic concern is there's an awful lot of stuff in here that really is getting into the business of private property owners in ways that we haven't done very much of that up until now. I'm not necessarily saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying it's very different. And I have concerns about that. But I did want to ask about outside the settlement area, whose thing is that with heritage designation? Thank you.
Put that to the manager of development services.
Yes, I just wanted to defer to Denise because she has she's made this recommendation and is aware of what the process is. So.
Thank you. Through the mayor, the Ontario Heritage Act would mean that if the property is within the municipal boundaries, then the municipality is the authority that may designate the property. But my reference to the county was that it's county official plan direction that provides the policy basis for how cultural heritage resources are managed. And by that, I mean, it's the county official plan that might say demolition is not a first resort. Any heritage impacts to a designated heritage property are to be considered and weighed against best practice guidance for conservation, right? So it's the county official plan that's giving that policy direction, not the town's official plan. Does that make sense?
Deputy Mayor?
Just for clarification, when you say properties within the municipal boundary would fit in here, but the settlement area doesn't include the whole municipal boundary. And once we get outside the settlement area in terms of zoning and that sort of stuff, the county plays the big role. So you're saying that settlement boundary line means nothing with heritage.
Under the Ontario Heritage Act.
Thank you.
In other words, the county cannot designate properties in the town of Saugeen Shores. Only the town of Saugeen Shores can do that. Correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the county may have an interest in moving a designation, but it would yes, essentially it's the municipality is the one that would primarily
The
move a
authority lies with the
designation.
lower tier. The authority
Right.
lies with the lower tier, not with the upper tier, correct?
Right.
Further questions or comments? Councilor Davinsky.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very short, thank you. Through you, listening to our deputy mayor, when I read the documents, I felt the same way, that maybe we were overstepping our bounds when it comes to private property and private property owners. And I thought, maybe that's me. Maybe I'm being too sensitive here. But having heard it from the deputy mayor, it's exactly what I was thinking of. I don't believe a heritage plan should include something like that where we would say, yes, you're a heritage property, you can't do anything, and we're coming to take a look at it. Could be very, very dangerous, and I certainly don't want to go down that route. That's my comment.
I just wonder if the consultant or the manager of development services has any comment to that. We've heard it from a couple of councillors.
I think I'll defer to Denise, although I empathize with the perception and certainly the success the town has had with participating owners, supportive owners. It doesn't create a good planning environment. We'd zone. The analogy is if we're looking at this as a planning exercise and you want to make defensible, well-informed decisions based on good general policy, good judgment, you need to develop a policy that includes all of the community and you evaluate the characteristics on a general application. You may choose not to designate anything, but it's not the policy of the towns because cultural heritage is a community responsibility protecting those cultural heritage assets. You need to have a policy to do that. And you can't say to the exclusion of anyone who doesn't like it. We don't zone that way. But I'll defer to Denise. She's got the legal pinpoint there because she's gone through hearings on this very issue. So
through you, Mr. Mayor, there is case law to show that designation, the cultural heritage resources are a public interest. And they are regulated provincially because cultural heritage resources are important to Ontario, right? Across Ontario to Ontario. So I think there's always a question of what is in the public interest. And that's how we make planning decisions. And that's good heritage planning as well. So if a property owner owns a building that the community feels or that a community feels has heritage value, and a motion is brought forward or a request is brought forward, then council should be looking at whether or not designation is warranted, right? So it goes to the Municipal Heritage Committee for consultation and then council. And there is case law to show that council cannot tie its hands, cannot have a policy that says we will not move a designation without a property owner's consent, and it can open the town up to legal action. So know that just as you would, and Jay sort of highlighted the connection to zoning, right? And if somebody brings forward something related to zoning, what is in the public interest, and you are making that assessment objectively. And there's always the ability to, of course, I mean, always reach out to property owners, always work proactively with property owners. Sometimes there's a gut reaction from a property owner because they don't understand what it means to be designated, but there's an ability to work with property owners to say, this is what we see are the heritage attributes. This is what our historical research is saying. This is what the community is saying they value about this place. These are the attributes. Let's talk about it. Let's have a conversation about, you know, what it would mean to be designated and what we can offer if you're designated, be it grants, be it tax rebates. But be aware that there is case law on this very subject. And so you know, it would not be appropriate to just say, we will not consider a heritage designation request simply because it's not our policy if the property owner is not on board. So take a look again. And this sort of speaks to the point of why we have so much background information in the report. It's to show you the basis for the recommendations that come later. And the case law is one of those bases. And if you don't understand that basis or understand the policy framework, it's a lot less clear why the objectives and the recommendations are coming forward. And that's why the document is set out this way. It might feel heavy, but you can't simply skip over the background. You cannot skip over the engagement that we've done. You cannot skip over the historical overview. You know, take the time to sort of work through what it's telling you about heritage in Saugeen Shores and therefore how we've arrived at the objectives. So yeah, I think that's where I'll sort of leave it for now, and I'm happy to clarify if there's further questions.
Sure, I might make a comment on it, on that particular topic, just since we're discussing it now about private property and the role of designation and the role of council with regard to the Ontario Heritage Act. And my knee jerk, my gut is the same as the Deputy Mayor's and Councillor Davinsky's when it comes to things like this. I recoil when I hear the notion of us imposing restrictions on private property owners in this way. But, you know, I hear what you're saying, Denise, about the law and about how we have to behave as a municipality in terms of ensuring we're, you know, creating policies that comply with the Ontario Heritage Act. So, you know, in my view, much like zoning, actually, in the way we've done it with planning, I think what we should be putting together is a policy that is permissive to the Heritage Committee when it comes to advancing designations for properties where the property owner wants to see that happen, where the property owner is supportive and is potentially asking for the designation to proceed. In that case, the Heritage Committee ought to proceed in working with that property owner. But in cases where the property owner is opposed or does not wish to see a designation proceed, I think those questions should immediately come to council before they advance at all. That council should decide and should be the decider as to whether or not the heritage value of a property is at such a high level and it's so critical to the community that it requires us to overstep or override the property rights of a private property owner. So in my view, that should be our policy. Perhaps there are circumstances where we might do that. For example, in the case where there's a piece of private property where there's significant cultural heritage remnants from an indigenous settlement or something along those lines, we might say as a council, that may come to us and we might say the property owner objects to us protecting that, but we should advance anyway. You know, so there are circumstances where we might need to take steps to do certain things to protect things of such significance. But in my view, that would be the last possible resort. And in the very limited circumstances, there are very few moments where I could see myself voting to override private property rights in this regard. But it should be a council decision, I guess is what I'm saying, not a decision of the committee in those circumstances. So, I mean, I'm hoping that we could advance a policy along those lines in connection to this. And I might just add one other comment related to this, that I see in here the notion of prioritizing proactively looking at the heritage registry for designations. This is concerning to me in that when we created the heritage registry, the understanding among the property owners was not that we would proactively advance designation of those properties, but that we had them on the list for reactive purposes, so that if they decided to demolish, then we might advance designation, but not that we would proactively go out and seek designation on their properties. I'm uncomfortable with that. I think we should not do that. I think we should leave the register as it is, and in the event there's a demolition comes forward, then we have the 60 days and we could advance designation in the manner I've just outlined, in accordance with the act. So I'm not super comfortable. I'm not comfortable at all with advancing proactively designations on those registry properties, and also not at all comfortable with doing it without the approval of the property owners themselves, unless, and if it does have to happen, if we do believe there's cultural significance that we need to protect, it should come to council. Council should make the call, not the Heritage Committee. So those are my views on that particular issue for your information. And since we were talking about it, I thought I'd raise it. Councillor Grace and, oh, sorry, Councillor Halpin hasn't spoken yet, so I'll turn it over to him. Councillor Halpin.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. See, I'm frozen up here now. Thank you, Mayor, and through you. I was pleased to be a part of the Heritage Committee for a 2-year term, and we have a very active Heritage Committee that saw quite a few applications. And I just want to say that in Saugeen Shores, we've always done better using carrots than sticks. And I am very much in favor of property rights, that people get to use their property to the full value, the full way they want to use their property according to the law. And I would continue to feel that way. And so I also don't want to see us making people designate. And let's just keep using the carrots and let's put the stick away. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. So I had a few others here. I'll come with Councillor Grace, and then I think the Deputy Mayor had her hand up after that. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a follow-up to the point about prioritizing, looking at designatable properties. We have the unfortunate reality that the provincial government has passed this legislation. Yes, they granted the extension to the original January 2025 deadline for dropping any of the properties on the heritage list that are not designated. But I do see merit in the Municipal Heritage Committee reviewing our heritage list. Perhaps we did hold a public meeting maybe a year ago in the summertime, reached out to people who had questions. We did get a couple of people who came to us as a result of that meeting and said, I would like to designate my property. Maybe doing an approach like that, realizing that that heritage list is no longer going to be able to offer that protection past January 1st, 2027. And those properties, once dropped, will not be, according to the current legislation, able to be back on that list for 5 years. So we wouldn't have as a council that opportunity to say, hey, this is a really incredibly valuable piece of property culturally and heritage-wise that we should be considering. So I do see some merit in talking about that with the Heritage Committee and saying, is this something that we could do, is review it and say, is there anything that jumps out at us here, knowing that we have that final deadline approaching at this point, unless something happens with the legislation again. Thank you.
Thank you. The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question. There's a proposed application here. What's it called? It is the application form. It's related to altering demolition or removal, and it's associated with designated properties, I believe. So I don't know if it's the heritage permit or what. I'm curious from the town's perspective, and perhaps I should have asked this question in advance, but what engagement have we had over the last 5 years with any of the property owners beyond the 4 that have just recently come before council? What engagement have we had with any of the property owners that own designated properties. And the reason why I ask this is even the list that, you know, I've had access to as a member of the Heritage Committee and what's on the website, the property owners that have been listed there, I suspect for privacy, though some of that information has been removed, but those are not even the current owners of properties. And in some cases, there might have been a death in a family, so property has passed down through an estate to some kids. And, you know, like, do we have any regular engagement with designated property owners? The reason why this becomes significant is, of course, this new application here, demolition or removal. The removal part, some of those properties that are designated, and I appreciate what was said about we've got to revisit the bylaws, but some of them are very specific elements within a house or within a building, let's say. So, if somebody doesn't even know that they really have to ask if they take down a particular, lintel or something, a windowsill or some wainscoting or some specific item, if they don't even know, like, it's how have we actually told people, hey, your property is designated, we know that, you should know that, and that's what this means. Have we done that ever?
Oh, the clerk wants to answer that one, the clerk.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Charbonneau. So, no, there hasn't been ongoing conversations. The bylaw gets registered on title when there is a designation, so that information should be flowing through the real estate transaction process for awareness. Certainly, if members of the public who've purchased a heritage home have questions, they would see that it's a bylaw and they can come to the town to ask questions. I'm going to surmise that in a lot of cases when somebody is purchasing a home that has a designation, it's because they know what they're looking for and they see that it's a heritage home and they love it and they treasure it and they want to preserve it, as I'm sure many members on council would do. So I think there is that level of awareness, but no, we are not reaching out to connect with them on an ongoing basis.
The Deputy Mayor.
Can I ask then specifically, as this process continues, that I don't believe they were a quote unquote group that was consulted. I could be wrong about that, but I don't believe they were. I would respectfully request that every single property owner of a designated property receive some kind of communication and an opportunity to read this draft report to enable them to make comments, because there are some direct impacts on the properties that they own. And, they may very well understand that their property is designated, but perhaps it was designated under very different rules. And if this provincial legislation supersedes previous stuff, important for them to know. So I would respectfully ask that we make that effort. I'm going to guess it's less than 10 property owners because we own a couple of those properties, so we can talk to ourselves. But to enable them to comment, because they are, as the clerk said, in many cases supportive members of the community who own heritage homes. Thank you.
Yep, I think that's been taken into consideration. Are there further questions or comments at this time? I wanted to, and I think it's important, particularly given we're talking about revisiting the existing bylaws, that we make sure that the property owners are engaged before we start any step of that process, because that could affect their property significantly. So we definitely have to engage them directly. The only other comment I had was about the historical context document, and it was raised by Jay. I just think we need to, there's a whole, history is long, right? There was however long the Earth, 4 billion years happened before Saugeen, before anybody, certainly any settler showed up here, and several billion before any human being arrived. And then, and now it comes up to 18. It seems like this document, it stretches back at a high level into the history of Indigenous settlement, but then focuses pretty intently on the period of 1850 through 1940, and then history stops again, right? And then because, there isn't a single mention in this document of the Bruce nuclear power development. Well, it's pretty hard to talk about the history of the town of Saugeen Shores at this point without mentioning the impact of Bruce Nuclear. There's a lot of people in this community who would not be here, a lot of people who would not be here otherwise for that, including me, and a few others around this table. So that, like, I'm just concerned about that that the document, that history is, from the standpoint of the way we talk about it, is just this very discrete period of time, where certain buildings were built, but it seems to say that, well, the built form and the things that happened after, say, 1940 aren't important historically, right? Like that's what you gather from that, right? Like that just because a building is in a certain style of a certain era, then it has historical value. But if it's built at 1960 forward, it isn't, right? And I just reject that. I reject it because history will carry on for a long time, and the built form of the 1980s is the built form of the 1980s. You may like it or not, but it's still a historical period in the community, and the culture, and also we're talking about the culture of the community. Boy, the culture of the community has changed an awful lot beyond the point where this historical context document stops. We have all sorts of different cultures in this community now. It's a very diverse community. It's changed significantly. So I think we got to revisit that historical context document, because I don't think anymore, like, the historical context document doesn't even intersect with the existence of the town of Saugeen Shores. And it's talking about the historical context of the town of Saugeen Shores, and it doesn't even come up till the year 2000 when the town of Saugeen Shores came into existence, which is 25 years ago, right? This is, Bruce Nuclear is pushing 70 years here, right? So, like, I think we got to include all that stuff in here, because if we're going to have documents that set out the cultural context of the community, then those things have to be included, because if we don't value those things in here, then we won't value them as part of our conversations around our heritage going forward. So, or at least that's the impression we'll give. So anyway, I think that document needs a relook before we approve it. I think it needs to cover more, I call it contemporary history, but the 1950s when Douglas Point was under review is hardly contemporary anymore. It's a long time ago. So, but anyway, that's my comment on that, and I hope to see some review of that. But anyway, all of that, I just want to finally say I appreciate all the work that you guys have done on this. It's a good it's a good document. You've done a lot of important work. You've given us that legislative context, and given us that historical context, and a lot of other things, and also the public consultations you've done, and the work of the Heritage Committee. I just really appreciate all the work that everybody has done on it, and I think it sounds like council wants to see a few changes to it, and we'll hear what the public has to say about it. They may also have some things they want to change, and I do sincerely hope that when we get something back, it's something we all like and that we can adopt, because as you say, the Deputy Mayor, I think, said it's been a long time coming. I think the early discussions now are so long ago that they themselves are a part of our heritage. So anyway, it'd be good to see it advance and be concluded. Anyway, thank you very much. There is a resolution. It's been moved and seconded, so I'll ask all in favor. That's carried. Thank you all very much. All right, so now we're on to the consent agenda. Does anybody want to have any of the items in the consent agenda considered on their own or taken out of the consent agenda? I don't see any requests for that. There's a resolution that items 8.1 through 8.2 be approved and received for information. Is there a mover and seconder? Councilor Grace, the Vice Deputy Mayor. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. So now we're on to bylaws, and there are 3 bylaws there for consideration. Anybody wish to consider any of the bylaws on? Seeing no request for that, there's a resolution that bylaws 7, 2025, 8, 2025, and 9, 2025 are hereby read, passed, and sealed this 13th day of January, 2025. Is there a mover and seconder? The Deputy Mayor and Councilor Davinsky. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried. Then the confirmatory bylaw, the bylaw 10, 2025, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Town of Saugeen Shores, is hereby read, passed, and sealed this 13th day of January, 2025. Is there a mover and seconder? Councilors Grace and Halpin. All in favor? That is carried. And finally, there's a resolution. This regular council meeting of January 13, 2025 hereby adjourns at 8:21 p.m. Is there a mover and seconder? Deputy Mayor and Councilor Stack. All in favor? Council stands adjourned. Have a good evening, everybody.
Hasta la vista, amigos.
Nice tan there, bud. You're looking good.
I forgot to use sunscreen.